Hello, this is Pastor Diana of First Baptist Church of South Bend. We had some technical difficulties this morning, and I apologize for those. But if you were trying to listen on Zoom or Facebook, and by the time we got to the sermon, things were pretty bad. So again, I apologize for that, and thank you for your graciousness. But I am going to just redo my sermon here in the next few minutes in case you want to watch it again and get the whole thing, or if you haven't watched yet, but we're planning to, I would encourage you to watch the sermon piece at least here as opposed to on the complete worship service from this morning. The microphone cut out a lot. So here we go. Jeremiah, plucking up and planting. We are starting a 6-week series on the book of Jeremiah. Today, we look at 2 passages. The first shares the vision of Jeremiah's call to speak as a prophet of God to his city and nation. And the second passage offers up a sermon that Jeremiah proclaimed as part of that prophetic message God commanded him to share. So now Paul's letter to the church at Philippi is sometimes referred to as the book of joy. Jeremiah is not. Jeremiah is a hard book written at a hard time. The people of Judah are facing defeat, exile, and destruction of everything that is most important to them, their homes, their city, the temple. It's written to people in a bad situation. But the truth is that most of the Bible is written to people in a bad situation. People oppressed by evil rulers and empires, slavery, hardship, exile, and persecution. I think that's one of the reasons the Bible remains so relevant. It is universal because suffering is universal. The specific shape of suffering may ebb and flow, but every person, every community, and every civilization that has ever lived has faced suffering in one form or another. For the people of Jeremiah's time, it was the onslaught of the Babylonian Empire. In Jesus' day, it was the occupation of the Roman Empire. Today, in 2021, we have just lived through the worst global pandemic in over 100 years, watching almost 3.7 million people die, mostly the poor and elderly. We've seen our nation's capital besieged by insurrectionists and a government that refuses to be held accountable. We have been forced to examine the deep-seated racism and violence upon which this nation was founded and under which it still labors. We have watched the integrity of the U.S. church tarnished as it sought to align itself with the powerful and the wealthy over the poor and marginalized, as it has sought to build walls of exclusion instead of bridges of welcome. We've seen the church we love racked by nationalism, racism, misogyny, homophobia, and sexual predation. We've had to face the reality that this congregation, this specific community, cannot continue in its present configuration, that despite our deep and long-standing connections, we are facing major changes that will mean an end to existence as we have known it, at least, since 1836. The situations are different, but I think we can put ourselves in a place of empathy with the people of Jeremiah's time. We understand hardship and suffering too. So what does this ancient story have to say to us? Well, just like the book as a whole, the passages we read today offer challenge and hope, although the hope only comes after the suffering. First, there is a hard call. God calls Jeremiah to be a prophet, and just like most other prophets in the Bible, Jeremiah protests. Truly, I do not know how to speak, for I am only a boy, he says. This is not a job he's sure he wants, and he's in good company. When God told Moses to go to Pharaoh to demand the release of the Hebrew slaves, what was Moses' response? Protest after protest after protest. Who am I? What if they don't believe me? I've never been eloquent. I am slow of speech and slow of tongue. How about when God told Isaiah to speak out? Woe is me, I'm lost, Isaiah lamented. But in each case, God provided a sign and a promise. Moses got a burning bush, a sidekick, and a magical staff. Isaiah received a burning coal and a vision of the heavenly throne room. And Jeremiah's mouth was touched by the very hand of God. In every instance, God promised to be with the prophet. Do not be afraid, for I am with you, he tells Jeremiah. You see, this call isn't about Jeremiah. Jeremiah is just a tool to be used by God. God makes sure that Jeremiah understands that God is in charge of this message. Look at verses 5 through 10. I formed you. I knew you. I consecrated you. I appointed you. I send you. I command you. I am with you. I have put my words in your mouth. I appoint you. There is no doubt at the end of this passage of who is the potter and who is the clay. The message is God's. This is not about Jeremiah spouting off his opinion. This is about God's mission in the world and Jeremiah's ability to be the mouth and hands and feet God uses to get that message delivered, which I think offers us a word of caution the next time we want to spout off in the name of God. We need to be very certain that God has put God's words in our mouth, or we need to claim our opinions for what they are. As a preacher, this is a very important point for me. I get up here every Sunday morning and deliver to you what I say is a message from God. I need to spend time in prayer and reflection to make sure that the words that I offer you are indeed from God and not just from me. Now, sometimes I fail in that, of course, as we all fail. But I am seriously committed to trying to make sure that what I share with you comes from the heart of God. God is at work in each of our lives. God calls each of us. And while we are all called to be disciples, we are not all called to be prophets. And that's a good thing, because the messages that God most often gives to prophets are usually not very popular. And most often, neither the message nor the messenger is graciously received. Now you understand their reluctance. So first there's a hard call, and then there's a hard message. What is God's message to Jeremiah? Look at verse 10. Today I appoint you over nations and over kingdoms, to pluck up and to pull down, to destroy and to overthrow, to build and to plant. Biblical scholar Walter Brueggemann says this verse is pivotal for the entire book of Jeremiah. Notice that six of the six verbs, the first four are all negative. Pluck up and pull down, destroy and overthrow. Only at the end do we get a couple of hopeful verbs, build and plant. He says, that is Brueggemann, that this message is a script about loss, a message about the destruction of the old city of privilege, and a warning that the old advantages are going to be plucked up and torn down, and that there is nothing that the people can do to keep it from happening. That any building and planting will only take place after the destruction and tearing down. Jeremiah is appointed over nations and over kingdoms. Jeremiah is called to serve and preach to a community, to an entire nation. This is not a message to individuals. Jeremiah is told to call out governments and systems, powers and principalities. Jeremiah is to deliver a message of their destruction. Now, how do you think the powers are going to react to Jeremiah's message? The same way powers react all the time to rebuke. Another Jeremiah learned that the hard way a few years ago. Jeremiah Wright was the pastor of Trinity United Church of Christ in Chicago in 2001 when 9/11 happened. When he pointed out very forcefully America's own history of terrorism toward Native Americans, African Americans, and Japanese Americans, he was crucified in the media. Jesus, when he called out the religious and political powers of his age, ended up actually crucified on a cross. The authorities of Jeremiah's day were not much more gracious. Jeremiah learns that being a prophet is most often a thankless job. That's why in chapter 7, he's preaching at the gate of the temple and not in the temple itself. He's an outsider, not an invited guest. He is not a beloved pastor, but a nuisance that disturbs the comfort of the worshipers, as an annoying disruptor of proper worship. Jeremiah offers a rebuke that disturbs Jerusalem's sense of protection and exceptionalism, their sense of being the chosen people of God. He points out that they want to claim the promises of God's and that relationship with God without bowing to the commands of God. Psalm 48 describes the temple theology that was in place at the time that assured the people of God's presence as a shield over Jerusalem. Great is the Lord and greatly to be praised in the city of our God. His holy mountain, beautiful in elevation, is the joy of all the earth. Mount Zion in the far north, the city of the great King. Within its citadels, God has shown himself a sure defense. The temple is seen as a powerful symbol of divine presence and protection, much as the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. is seen as a powerful symbol of security, democracy, and the rule of law. Jeremiah warns the people, however, not to trust in this theology, not to trust in the words, "This is the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord, the temple of the Lord." The temple and the city are not invincible. And in fact, they will be razed in 587 BC by the Babylonian army. Jeremiah's message points out the reality that the symbol of God's divine presence and protection is rendered meaningless when we don't follow through with God's desires outside the sanctuary. God is not, reminds Jeremiah, not a security blanket, a magic amulet, or a magic wand. You can't spend 6 days a week oppressing the orphan, the widow, the poor, the marginalized, and then run to the temple and treat it like a safe base in a game of tag. You cannot shed innocent blood, the blood of Black bodies, brown bodies, trans bodies, Muslim bodies, and then run to the sanctuary and expect that there will be no repercussions. You can't go after other gods, gods of violence, power, and greed, and then run into the temple and claim that you are the chosen of Yahweh. You cannot steal, murder, commit adultery, swear falsely, make offerings to Baal, and go after other gods, and then come and stand before God in this house, which is called by God's name, and say, "We are safe." Jeremiah says that the temple has become a den of robbers, an image that Jesus will directly appropriate, and one that might be used at times for the church today. A den is not the place that robbers do wrong. They go out into the highways and byways to waylay people. A den of robbers is the place they go back to afterward, taking their ill-gotten gains with them, a place they feel safe from discovery and from consequences. But, Jeremiah tells Judah, this is a false sense of security because God sees what they did out in the world. God sees the disconnect between their worship and their daily behavior. He reminds them that their actions will have consequences. In this case, their lives will be plucked up, the temple will be pulled down, the city will be destroyed, and the government will be overthrown. This is a hard lesson that every empire that has ever ruled has had to learn. There's a tension here, a tension we still struggle with. God's presence and protection, salvation, if you will, is both grace and, in some way, contingent on adherence to the will of God. Yes, God's salvation through Christ is a gift of God's grace, which we do not deserve and cannot earn, but there is some connection to our behavior. In Matthew, Jesus says that we will be known by the fruit we produce and will be separated like sheep and goats and judged on whether we fed the hungry, gave water to the thirsty, welcomed strangers, and visited the prisoners and the sick. The epistle of James says that without works, faith is dead. Let me say that again. The epistle of James says that without works, faith is dead. And Paul tells the Corinthian church that if we don't build well on the foundation that Christ laid, that we will be saved, but only as though through fire. German theologian Dietrich Bonhoeffer reflected on the idea of cheap grace, the difference between the recognition that we are always going to be imperfect and the recklessness of disregarding our disobedience. Christ may have assured our ultimate place in heaven, but to live in disregard of the current lives of our fellow humanity makes a mockery of Christ's teachings and sacrifice. The scripture teaches us that we cannot separate our ethics from our devotion to God. We are called to live a moral life in covenant with God, rejecting those ways in which we harm a neighbor's life, property, or name, living with an attitude of special concern for the disadvantaged or oppressed members of the community. If we don't, there are real consequences in the world. There is real suffering, real pain, and real destruction. Real lives are destroyed. In some real way, our moral life is tied to our devotion and allegiance to the Lord. There is a correlation between what goes on inside the sanctuary and what takes place outside it. A lesson that Judah didn't seem to appreciate, and a lesson that our own nation doesn't seem to grasp either. The United States was founded on the idea of white American exceptionalism. Much of its wealth was built through genocide, slavery, and racism. White privilege pervades its culture to this day, and white nationalism invades many of our institutions, even many churches. I believe that the current state of affairs in the nation can be directly related or linked to our willingness to continue to oppress the alien, the orphan, and the widow. The Cherokee, Apache, and Dakota, the African American, the Mexican and Honduran, the trans. To do these things and then expect God to bless us is delusional and dangerous. We are suffering the effects of thinking we can use and abuse others for our own profit and benefit without consequences. Those who have been used and abused are fed up with it. As Jeremiah Wright quoted in that now infamous sermon, America's chickens have come home to roost. There will be a reckoning, just as Jeremiah promised Jerusalem in the 6th century BC. Jeremiah's call is a call to justice from the God of justice. Jeremiah calls the people to decide where their ultimate trust lies, in the temple or in the ultimate one who inhabits the temple. The building and rituals and words of the liturgy, or the relationship and the walk. One is idolatry and the other is true worship. A hard call and a hard message. But Jeremiah also offers a kernel of hope beyond the loss. There will be rebuilding. but not until after the destruction. There will be replanting, but not until after the plucking up. I will dwell with you, says God. God desires intimacy with us, all of us. God desires a way of blessing the whole earth. God is still at work, urging us toward a future of hope beyond the plucking up and pulling down, beyond the destruction and overthrowing. Sometimes, as Becky pointed out for us in our connection time, sometimes a garden has to be weeded before the flowers can bloom in all of their glory. Right now, it feels like we are surrounded by weeds. COVID, insurrection, division, unrest, uncertainty. What needs to be plucked up in order for the lily of the valley to bloom? To make room for the tree of life to spread its roots? How can we, as the church, help to make that happen? What do we need to pluck up? What is God planting even now in the midst of turmoil that might bloom in divine beauty? What is God doing beyond COVID, beyond January 6th, beyond our September business meeting? What hearts are being transformed? What communities are being formed? What voices are being lifted up? How can we, like Jeremiah, offer words of both warning and hope? How can we offer comfort in this time of plucking up? How can we plant seeds of grace and transformation? May we, the church, hear the call of God just as Jeremiah did. And may we be obedient in sharing that message, whatever it is, as Jeremiah was. Amen.